So today at the Explorer Ranch, my main project is I've got two big white oak trees on the ground, and I want to get those sawn up and hauled and dumped up at the wood pile. Anyway, that's what I'm going to be working on today. We'll see how much I get done. Maybe you're wondering what's up with the lanterns. I just like lanterns.
First order of business was to air up that low tire. I've got a right rear tire on that Polaris has a very slow leak, and I need to get that fixed. I really need to get that serviced, but I'll probably do that myself. It's overdue. Been not way overdue, but it's time. Anyway, I came down here a few weeks ago. I was going to saw this whole tree up into firewood, and I'm really glad I didn't, because after I looked it over again, I realized I can get two 10.5 foot length logs out of there for a project I'm going to do down the road. I'll talk about it more later. Right there, I'm just marking the 10.5 foot mark a couple of times, and so I'd remember where that was. I'd remember where it was when I got down there with my saw. But anyway, so I decided to do that, and then saw the rest of it up into firewood, stove wood particularly, 12-inch lengths, and I'll explain that in a minute. But while I'm thinking about it, two terms that get misused an awful lot as it relates to firewood is cord and rick, regardless of how you spell cord. A cord of wood is 4 feet high, 4 feet wide, and 8 feet long. Whether it's cut in 16-inch lengths, 24-inch lengths, whatever, but 3 pieces laid side by side, 16 inches long, 4 feet high, 4 wide, 8 long. That's 128 cubic feet, if you do the math on that, regardless of if it's 4 foot lengths, 24-inch, 12-inch, 16, whatever it is, 4 by 4 by 8. In a perfect situation, about 16-inch lengths, that's 48 inches, and then you got your cord of wood. Rick of wood depends on what part of the country you live in, and people misuse that a lot. Nobody's fault. It's just, and I'm sure there's parts of the country where if you say rick, everybody that's in the firewood industry or buying firewood with any kind of frequency and all that, they may all agree that a rick of wood is X. But for the most part, it's a generic term, means a stack of wood. In some parts of the country, it may mean a quarter cord. It might mean in other parts half a cord, third a cord. Half cord is technically a face cord, but I don't know if that's a universal term. I believe it's pretty much widely accepted. Anyway, somebody says they're going to sell you a cord of wood. You ask them how big of a stack of wood is that, and see if it's 4 by 4 by 8, and that way you can compare to somebody else that might be selling an actual cord. And not that anybody would take advantage of you, but every industry's got a few hackers in it, and some people, if they think you don't know what you're talking about or what they're talking about, they'll take advantage of you. So now you know. Cord of wood, 128 cubic feet. This part of the country, we just got rocks. I mentioned it before, but you got to really work to keep your bar up keep your chain out of the rocks. And so when you see me looking back and forth across that log, and that's what I'm doing. I'm really aware of the end of that bar, where it is in relation to the ground. Right here, I'm looking for rocks. I guarantee you, I would not be sticking my hand underneath there and pulling the leaves and so forth out if this was a warm part of the year. Those snakes come out. Man, that's a great place for a copperhead or a rattlesnake to be laying. But it doesn't happen all that often, but it happens often enough. So you really got to be careful with that. But anyway, I'm working diligent, or I'm being really aware of where my bar, front and back of that bar, is at all times. And later on this next tree, when I go to cutting it up, I actually getting down toward probably halfway done with it, and I had a rock, but I made it through this without doing that. But anyway, you just have to constantly be aware here in southwest Missouri, where we've got as many rocks as we have squirrels and crows, maybe more, actually more rocks than we have anything. Beautiful part of the country, very rocky soil. And so when you see me cutting here on these two trees, sometimes with using more of the end of the bar or the upper half of it than the back half, it's in an effort to try to keep that tip of that bar, to keep it out of the rocks, keep it off the ground. If we lived in a part of the country where we had just dirt and no rocks in the soil, man, that'd be awesome. I'd just lay that chainsaw down on there and let it drop through that wood, and wouldn't worry too much about it getting in the dirt, although the dirt will dull your chain as well, but not nearly as fast as rocks. I got down there and I realized there's another section there, and I measured it off. Sure enough, I was able to get a little over an 8 foot log out of there to use in this project that I've got coming up at some point. Balake, if you're watching here, I slowed that down just for you, buddy. I just wanted you to see that little flip there, that little nonchalant flipping that little, discarding that little limb out of the way. Balake, he's my friend and next door neighbor here, and he's a fellow woodsman, and he likes to do a lot of saw work. So no inside joke there. That was just kind of, thought he might get a kick out of that. I'm just cutting a notch across the top of that, down in through that through the bark, and that'll just help it dry out if I don't get that log up out of there in the near future. And then I'm coming back and not only cleaning it up and cutting the knots and the limb stubs off and that kind of thing, but decided to, again, not knowing when I'll get that out of there. May get it out of there soon, may not. But I went and cut the bark off the side of those logs all the way down, and that way that helps that dry out. And if it ends up being a while before I get those pulled up out of there, then it'll already start the drying out process, and it'll help keep the bugs out of it. If the more moisture you have in wood laying on the ground around these parts of the country anyway, the more problems you're going to have with beetles and ants and all kinds of bugs that bore into wood, termites as well, getting up in there and messing your wood up. So that's why I'm doing that. Many times over the years I've cut sawn up logs like this and left them laid, stacked them up sometimes with the intention of doing something with them, and years went by and I didn't do anything, and went back and they were still good firewood, but they had degraded beyond useful purposes, at least for what I had planned. You can see the kind of snot that I'm dealing with there, and if I'd have been smart, I would have gone through and cut all that out of there ahead of time, but gosh, that's so much work. It takes longer to do that than it does just to go ahead and fight it and saw up the tree. So real thick briars and a lot of dead stuff that fell off that tree when I cut it down. I cut that tree down as well as the one I'm going to get to here in a minute a few weeks ago whenever had three of my friends out, Speedo, Josephus, and Barbarino. They came out, and I don't like to cut these big oak trees down unless somebody's out there to watch in case something goes terribly wrong. I'm very, very careful on cutting trees down, but as you'll see here in a little bit, that other white oak, when I cut it down, I was 99% sure it was going to fall one way, actually due west. It ended up falling due east. I could have made it fall west, but I didn't get my wedges behind my bar in time, and it leaned back a little bit and pinched my bar, so I went ahead and just let it fall the way that it was leaning, and it fell exactly the opposite way. But Speedo was there to capture that on video, and I got a little clip there that I'll make sure I add in here. I put that limb underneath there to do two things: to catch that log when it fell, so it was off the ground a little bit, and then also so whenever I do that underneath cut there, that bottom cut, I can run that saw along that the edge of the top of that log, and if it kicks back on me or whatever, as I put it under there, it'll keep it out of the dirt and the rocks, and again save my blade, or I mean my chain. I'm just cutting the side of the bark off the side of that log. These old white oaks, occasionally you'll see one a dead one, standing dead, you cut it down, or it falls down, you go to saw it up. Occasionally you'll have where the center of that tree has been hollowed out by the bugs, but not very often, and it usually doesn't go very far up the tree. You can cut down a red oak sometimes and it'll be hollow, partially hollow, at least all the way up, to where the limbs, first row of limbs are. Sometimes more than that. Anyway, I got that tree processed, and not a ton of firewood out of that one because I ended up keeping 3 logs out of it. But this tree here, I ended up with a 10.5 foot piece, and I think an 8. And again, I'll talk more about that project whenever the time comes. But again, all this snot here that I'm working around, I should have cut some of that. I did cut some of it out, but once I get going on the tree, I just like to get it done and work around the brush, and as long as it's not unsafe, no big deal. So I typically start at the top of the tree. This happens to be downhill. So I'm at the top and I'm at the downhill part of the tree, but working my way up toward the bottom of the tree, if that makes sense. But couple of things. First off, that tree, just I cut it down just at the right time. The top, probably 20%, 25% of that tree was just dried out perfectly. And those that big limb I'm sawing up right there, every piece of that could go just right into the wood stove. I mean, it's dried out to just about the perfect moisture content, and it's solid. And that's a piece off a limb split just to show how fine that wood is on the inside of that. Man, you could almost make furniture out of that. Sand that down. It's just beautiful, beautiful wood. It's going to burn real nice. But yeah, the top part of that, it'll be. I'll burn some of that this year while it's before it gets too hot to have the wood stoves going. You see me using the end of that. If you're a highly experienced saw person or maybe a professional that happened onto this by accident, I'm using the end of that bar like that because it's so rocky. This soil's so rocky that I'd like to lay that saw up across there and let the back end of that chain, that bar, do the work, which is where most of the power is, or more. You have more power back there at the closer you get to the call it the engine than out at the end of that bar. Plus the weight of the saw pushes down on it, and that helps as well. But anyway, all that to say, you'll see me using the end of that bar a lot on this tree, and it's because I'm trying to really control it and keep it out of the dirt and the rocks. So as I cut through, I'll pull that bar back in to the right at the edge of the outside, far away side of that log that I'm cutting on away from me, if that makes sense. I'm probably not explaining that right, but bottom line, I'm doing that to try to so I can control where that bar is and keep it out of the rocks. And I managed to do that until I got a ways up this tree here, and I here in a while you'll see. Well, you won't see it, but I clipped a rock and it didn't dull. I just barely clipped it just enough to dull it. It didn't like ding the teeth up, but it was dull enough that I decided to, as Dad always says, shut her down. When if you see a spark or you hit a rock, just shut her down. You're kidding yourself if you keep sawing. Go sharpen it or change out the chain, put a new one on, or a freshly sharpened one, or whatever. There, I'm just clearing some stuff out and getting where every now and then you'll see my foot slide a little bit, and that's because I probably stepped on a rock or some debris underneath the leaves. It's just something you have to deal with if you're cutting firewood in this part of the country and up and down the side of these hills or doing whatever. It's just something you got to be aware of. But man, that was just some. This is gonna be some beautiful, beautiful wood to burn, and it just doesn't hardly get any better than that. These oak trees, I don't have much experience really at all with conifers, with pines and so forth as firewood. I'm of the understanding that a pine tree, when it dies standing, that within a couple of years you can cut it down and it will have dried out and be ready to burn. Not so on these oaks. Now, again, the top part of this dried out fairly quickly. This tree had been dead, I think, I'd noticed it 3 or 4 years ago, maybe 5, that it was dead. And so anyway, the top part of it, as I said, was dried out. But the further I get toward the base of that tree, toward the bottom of the tree, you'll see that wood darkens up, and that's because it has a higher moisture content. And once a tree dies and it stops, the photosynthesis process stops. I'm no plant biologist or expert on trees, but I do know that once that stops, and the tree, the leaves, and the limbs stop drawing moisture up through the tree, through the root system, and once that happens, then the moisture starts wicking out of the tree, and it starts drying out. But if you leave an oak tree that dies standing up, this is a big old rock here that you can see. I thought that was a piece of wood when I was cutting, but luckily I saw it. And but if you leave a standing dead white oak or red oak tree, if you wait too long to process it, it's going to start, the upper part of it's going to start rotting real bad. And it'll stand up there a long time and still be, the trunk of it's going to be good. But as far as utilizing the limbs, they'll get bugs in them, and the woodpeckers will old peck in there going after the insects and make holes, which makes it easier on more insects to get inside and moisture and that kind of deal. And so anyway, not a major deal, but I found that on an average, when an oak tree of this size dies, if you wait, actually you can cut it down right away. You don't have to wait any time at all. But if you do end up waiting, say 3 years or so, the mast of that tree, the limbs, the upper limbs, and so forth, are going to dry out, and they'll just be perfect for burning. But what the heck? If you take it down right away and you saw it up and stack it, split it, and so forth, split it and stack it, then there's nothing wrong with that either. It's just kind of however you want to do it. Everybody's got probably a different system, I would imagine. If my wife by chance is watching this, I lost her a long time ago. She'd be, seriously? 16 minutes cutting up a tree? Who wants to watch that? Well, maybe not very many people. I don't know. But this is what I do. A lot of my time. I don't do this full time. I'm no pro. I tell you what, that said, next time you buy a cord or a rick of wood, unless somebody's skinning you on the price, you'll have an idea just kind of watching this, what all is involved in processing a tree, and whether you're doing it the way I do it with a hand splitter when it goes to splitting, or you're using a hydraulic splitter or combination. It's hard work any way you slice it. And I tell you what, one of the all-time probably most knowledgeable wood people, firewood, tree cutting fellas that ever walked the planet, was a friend of not just mine, but many people, and all of my fellow Rolla boys and all, but a fellow by the name of Bill Lennox. And old Bill, man, he was good at a lot of things, and but one of them was anything and everything to do with firewood. Man, you talk about a pro. He didn't do it for a living, but he could have, and if he would have, he probably would have been a millionaire off of firewood. He could sure cut it and process it. That piece I'm at there, you can kind of see the bend in that tree. It had a beautiful, kind of an ugly bend in it actually, where that tree grew up, and then at the time when it was a younger tree, it had a big canopy apparently above it, so it grew downhill quite a ways to get around and get some sunlight apparently. Anyway, ended up having a permanent big bend in that tree, and if I'd have had a specific use for it, I would have. You'll see here in a little bit where I process that part of it, but it would have made a really, really neat, I don't know, archway or something in a home, or in some kind of a rustic building, whatever it might be, or possibly a piece of furniture or some specialized use. But I know from experience, if I saved that thinking I was going to do something with it, I'd end up cutting it up into firewood someday anyway. So I didn't mess with it. This sapling I'm going to cut off here, no big deal, but you can see how it's bent over. See how that popped back? Imagine, I did it in slow motion, you can see it, watch it again, but watch how that pops back. That tension on that sapling. Now you can imagine if that sapling had been 5-6 inches in diameter, especially if it had been like a hickory, and you cut that like that and you weren't prepared and that thing comes back. There's a lot of people that have been hurt that way. And a lot of times when a tree falls, it'll fall on these smaller trees, bend them over, and you got to be, just be careful. It's not anything to be afraid of, but just be real careful if you're processing a tree, and go and cut those things off. Know which way they're gonna spring and give, and it's a good way to get hurt if you're not paying close attention. Well, I hit that rock, and once you can tell when you hit it. I didn't hear it, I didn't see it, but I could tell by the way my saw started acting, and all of a sudden I'm kicking out, instead of kicking out big chunks, I'm kicking out sawdust, basically, not much bigger than sawdust. So shut her down, went up, got the Husqvarna 51 that I bragged on a lot. Probably wore you out on it, those who were watching this. But I had forgotten that that last time I used it, that I also had hit a rock. I didn't take the time to change out the chain or sharpen it. So anyway, that's why it did take me long to figure that out. So back up the hill, got the steel out, and sharpened it. I've never been real good at sharpening a chainsaw chain. Anywhere after I sharpen one, it's anywhere from slightly better to maybe quite a bit better, but never great. Never anywhere close to as good as they are when they're new or professionally sharpened. But I put a sharpen job on this darn thing here, and I was surprised whenever I went down and put that on back on that tree. Man, it was like brand new. I was very surprised, but I really took my time on it. I was real careful about the angle. I just sharpened it freehand, but got it sharpened up really good. So that kind of fired me up. Next time I sharpen it, I'm gonna see if I can't replicate that, and maybe it's a matter of just slowing down. But man, I put that on that tree, and it took off. It was really kicking out the chunks. You can see how big the trunk of that tree was, and I'm kind of excited about the beam I'll be able to get out of that. I'll easily be able to get an 8-inch by 8-inch 10.5 foot beam out of that, and could probably get a bigger one than that, but I don't think since I won't be able to get too many of them that are 10 by 10, I'll just probably cut that to 8 by 8 and take the leftover wood and just use it for stove wood. That piece there is what I was talking about that grew where it was bent. Would have made a beautiful arch of some kind, or maybe I don't know, you could have made several legs maybe for rocking chairs or whatever. But if I ever get in the furniture making business, that's the kind of thing I'll be looking for when I'm out there in the woods, those little treasures that are just really all over these hardwoods. You can see all the snot underneath it there, so took me a while to get it. It almost rolled up, kept rolling down that hill, and if it would have been, it would have probably gone 20 feet or so before it hit something big enough to stop it. And you can see I already had that sawn about 80% through on those cuts I made on it, so now it's just a matter of turning it over, getting the uncut portion up on top or close to the top, and then finish sawing it. And no big deal, just part of the technique, part of the process of cutting firewood, especially on a hill and especially on these old in this rocky soil. Nicodemus, if you're watching, you can see I've got that Ruger strapped on there. It's a good woods carrying gun, man, because it's fairly lightweight, and I mean, I know it's there. It's not like I forget it's there, but it's not nearly as heavy as carrying many of the options that a person would have if they were wanting to carry a gun around. Man, that wood, look at that. There's not a check in there. There's not a hole. That's just not a bug spot. Just perfect wood. I intentionally set that iPhone up there on that tripod so you could see these chunks coming out of the back of that saw. That's music to a woodsman's ears. Woodman's ears? Maybe that's how you say that. Anyway, that was pretty much it, other than collecting all that firewood up. You can see that awesome log that came out of that. That's going to be a dandy. It's going to be so nice I may decide to saw that up into lumber. I don't know. But there it is. Between the two of those trees, I don't know, that was probably 3 hours worth of work maybe. Would have been less than that if I'd have been up on top of a hill, but that's that big knot I cut out of there. I just set that saw up there. I thought that's a cool picture. But then I came back. I'll wait and make another video. I came back and collected up that wood and hauled it off and so forth. I'll include that in another post. Made a list this morning at breakfast, or that morning at breakfast. There's my project list. You can see what it is. Project 696 down to 700, my top 5. I'd like to get all those done by this fall. We'll see how I do. There's my get dones, the things that really need to be done as soon as I can. There's a hope project. I hope I live long enough to do that one. Hope project number 37. And then, but that's the big one right there. I made a commitment to my grandkids. And so I'm going to fulfill that one as long as good Lord willing, I'll get that one done by this fall, whatever it takes. Previously, I did a post about this old Winchester Model 1897 shotgun that my good friend Nicodemus had gifted me several years ago, and I'd speculated that gun might have been manufactured, say, in the 30s or 40s. It was a wild guess, but I took some time to do a little bit of official research and found out that doggone gun was manufactured in 1903. So 100 and coming up on 120 years ago. Just amazing. Teddy Roosevelt was president. That's the year the Wright brothers had their famous flight. Hardly anybody. I don't think the car had even been invented in the U.S. at least, and so people didn't have cars. Most people, especially rural folks, wouldn't even have had running water or electricity, and that gun would have been a big part of somebody's family, and would have been, no doubt, put food on the table. And man, it's just cool. So Nick, I'm honored, man, to have possession of that gun and be able to show it and use it and share it, and can't wait for you to come out and shoot that thing for the first time. Man, really appreciate it. And thanks y'all for tuning in, and we're going to do our best to keep you posted.